Hello, everyone. My name is Kiana, and I am a newly elected steering committee member, and I'm also the president and founder of grassroots nonprofit Hero Tent. Today, I'm here to introduce our next panel, The Donkey in the Living Room, moderated by Norman Solomon. Norman is an author, a columnist, an activist, a co-founder of the Roots Action, and a CPA board member. Norman, take the stage.
Hi. Hey, thanks so much. And hi, everybody. And many thanks to the California Progressive Alliance for bringing us all together here. We're going to be talking about the situation with progressives and the Democratic Party, sort of a concentric question nationally, statewide, and locally. And so we're just going to jump right into this. And first, I thought I would pose a general question and ask each panelist to talk for a couple of minutes. Your take on, here we are, March 6th, your take on where we are right now in terms of progressives and the National Democratic Party. I know that's a broad question. It's a deep question, really. And so we're going to start with Kalra, who is an assemblyman in the California State Legislature.
Thank you so much, Norman. Thank you for your leadership over the years in the progressive movement. And of course, Kiana, so grateful to your work in Sounds like Hero Tent and uplifting those here in San Jose. And, you know, as far as when I think about the progressive movement and the Democratic Party, and of course, we have some great folks that will be following me to discuss this. I think that we're in a better place than we've been in a very long time. Now, that doesn't mean that there's still not a lot of work to do. And I think a lot of that work has to do with the work that's already been done. It's organizing work, it's education work. And, you know, if you look right now with the disappointment that we all have in not having the $15 minimum wage included in the new COVID stimulus, the fact that it's even where it is, and the fact that it got to a point where we could even level some disappointment that we got close and it didn't get in there a few years ago, it wouldn't have even been part of the conversation. I think that's a testament to the grassroots progressive movement getting more and more absorbed into the Democratic Party and the Democratic Party, not just messaging, but actual policy making. And so, again, although we have a lot of work to do, including here in California, I do think we have an opportunity, and I think we have to take advantage of the opportunity right now that the community is struggling, the community is suffering. And with that suffering, with that struggle, I think it's quite clear that the values of the progressive movement are the values and the policies that have the best chance of lifting people out of that misery. And I think more and more people are seeing that. And I think it's up to us collectively to educate, to organize, communicate, you know, what policies we believe could be most effective, listen to the community as to what policies they are urging us to advance, and ultimately have it become part of the Democratic Party first policy and platforms. And California has a very progressive platform. We have to then manifest that into actual policy making. And some of the other folks that are on this panel are excellent at doing that and have been a big part of having these progressive values and policies start to really become a part of the Democratic Party platform. But again, we have to move it to action, and we haven't had enough action in that regard.
Hey, thank you, Ash. And our next speaker is Jane Kim. Jane, for 8 years, was on the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, and many of us know her as well in her leadership with the Bernie Sanders campaign last year throughout the state. So Jane?
Norman, thank you so much for moderating. And by the way, just huge props to Assemblyman Kalra, who introduced AB 1400, Medicare for all, single payer healthcare, which we all need to get behind. Unfortunately, we don't have 120 Osh Kalras in the state legislature, so we really need to move a number of his colleagues if we want to see single payer healthcare actually happen here in the state of California. And with 1 out of every 9 Americans living here in the state, if we were able to pass single payer in California, we would make such a huge dent in, achieving this huge goal as part of our progressive agenda. About this conversation about progressives and the Democratic Party, I think all of us have in many ways been engaged in that conversation. Some of us have run for office and have served, myself and Assemblymember Kalra included. Many of us work on political campaigns. Actually, Susie and I both worked on the leadership of Bernie 2020 here in the state of California. And, I think far beyond every expectation that was had of our campaign, of our candidate, we resoundingly won California, an unapologetic, progressive agenda based on equity, won in the state. And we didn't just win in the liberal enclaves of the Bay Area and Los Angeles. We won in Central Valley and Inland Empire and San Diego and Northern California. And I think it just goes to show that with resources, because we were a well-resourced campaign that spent millions of dollars invested in California and in a ground game, door-to-door organizing and door knocking, we were able to win the majority, 46 out of 53 congressional districts. And I think that campaign gave me a lot of hope for California. And I think it just also showed that with resources and with a strong field campaign, a progressive agenda can win here in the state. It's just that progressive campaigns often don't have that level of resources powered by small donors across the country that allowed us to win here. So when we see the losses of measures like Proposition 15 this past November and other statewide ballot measures, I think the big lesson for me is honestly that money is the biggest indicator of what wins here. It's not that the loss of Prop 15 is a true reflection of where Californians are at around issues of equity and progressive revenue reform. But it's really about the amount of money that gets poured in, usually against us and against our agenda. And, and this will be my hopeful take, and I think we'll have this continued conversation throughout the panel. My hopeful take is that, we can continue to win. It's just that there's no kind of easy magic bullet solution. We're going to have to do it the hard way, and that's going to be going door to door. It's going to be the on the ground organizing that's going to help us win. And as Assemblyman Kalra said, the fact that $15 minimum wage is even being discussed at the Senate and Congress is a step forward. And we need to take hold of this amplification of our agenda that has happened over the last few years and really take it to the people. And actually, if anything, that is the best way for us to win, is on the ground and door to door with the movement and the people with us, not just because we're right, because we think we're right and we know we're right, but because the people in the movement are also behind us.
Hey, thanks, Jane. And our next speaker, Susie Shannon, is not only a presence, and for a long time a presence in the California Democratic Party, as we know from hearing her at many conventions, but also is on the Democratic National Committee. So Susie?
Thank you so much, Norman, for inviting me onto this panel. And I really want to thank the California Progressive Alliance and Kiana and everyone on the panel. I'm just really excited to be here today. So on the national level, the situation is pretty dire, right? So we have millions of people who are out of work right now. We have over 500,000 people who are homeless in the nation. We have over 151,000 people who are homeless in the state of California, and that's pre-COVID numbers. So things are not great. There are, it basically took COVID for people to understand the importance of cash assistance, right? So whether that's in the form of $600 payments or $1,400 payments, which we really hoped would be monthly and at $2,000, at least we're having this conversation now about the need for cash assistance so that people can afford food and clothing and a roof over their head. And that's a little harder, is the roof over the head. But also tenant assistance and unemployment benefits and all of the things that we're seeing now, which were like a logjam for a lot of us who've been working on, particularly on poverty issues for so long. So I came into the Democratic Party as an activist. I didn't come in, I came in like 2005 to 2007. And really it's because I, added poverty issues to the Democratic Party platform that led me to even run for some of these positions, because for the most part, I just thought, what was the point of getting involved in the Democratic Party? So, I was a single payer activist, an anti-war activist. And so I work on these issues within the party. Most people will hear me talk about poverty issues. In particular, I work with homeless and low-income communities. And I think there are three basic things that we can do right now to really help people. One is to move for a universal housing voucher system as an entitlement. That means anyone who meets the income requirement should be able to get a housing voucher to get housing. We are going to see what is, a lot of tenant displacement and a lot of folks who are going to get eviction. We're facing an eviction crisis. We've done everything that we can, I think, to help with the rental assistance. I worked on the campaign to give $5 billion in rental assistance from the state. We did get $2.6 billion as a pass through. And we're going to see in a couple of weeks that's not going to be enough. So we're going to move for another 2.4 billion. And I really hope that Kalra, I'm so excited that you're on this panel, because I really hope that you'll support that as you did for the, I know that you signed up on our letter. But these are things where just on the ground, they're very important. And the thing is, progressives are already there. We've been there for a really long time. And what we need now are moderates to come out of their comfort zone and to understand that this can't just be COVID relief, that we need real structural change so that we're providing all of these benefits to people who are falling, through the cracks in our system. And we see that there's like structural problems that have come to the forefront. But to the extent that we now are like moving for universal housing vouchers, for universal basic income and single payer health care, which I would put as the top 3 things to help lift people out of poverty, to help them have a roof over their head, health care, food, clothing, all of those basic needs, which sometimes, and I know, Norman, you've heard me say this a lot of times, get swept under the rug, particularly in progressive politics. And I'm always there going, where's the discussion about homelessness? Where's the discussion about low-income tenants? Where is that discussion in the, in the context of what we're talking about in the Democratic Party? So the party itself, for me, I see it as a brand and I see it as a tool. If the party is your destination, you have a problem. That should never be your destination. Your destination should be helping people and how you use the Democratic Party as a tool to do that. I don't care if somebody is progressive, moderate, I don't care what they come from. If they're putting a barrier in front of us to helping people, that is a problem. And I will call that out time and time again, and I will try to get around those barriers. But I think we need to start thinking about things that way, because with hundreds of thousands of people who are homeless and millions of tenants who are rent burdened, it is our obligation as Democrats to be helping people. And so with all of the interfighting, all the things that go on within our progressive movement, as long as we have that goal and people are not putting barriers in the way, I think that we're going to see in the next couple of years that we're going to be a force to be reckoned with.
Okay, thank you, Susie. And next we're going to hear from Amar Shergill, who is the chair of the California Democratic Party Progressive Caucus. Amar?
It's great to be here. Hearing the discussion, I just wanted to be on screen and cheer for everybody along the way, because these are the issues that we need to be talking about, right? Is that sometimes we get caught up in the things that don't happen, and we think we're just all alone pushing that boulder up the hill. But really, our progressive movement, like Kalra was saying, is more successful than it's ever been. And we have more people working on this project than ever before. And the momentum is with us. And I think that boulder is at the top of the hill. We're about to come down the other side. We have more help than ever before. And we see that with Kalra with his courageous step, with CalCare in California. We see Susie Shannon, who's doing amazing things for housing, and who drags elected officials down to the places where they see the suffering. And we have more people that are willing to hear that conversation. But what I wanted to touch on was what Jane Kim mentioned, is money, right? This is still a money problem. And if we take a look at those propositions last election cycle that were defeated, millions and millions of dollars came in against the issues that we know we care about, and we know that people in California are with us on. So one of the things we need to do, and as chair of the Progressive Caucus, I think this is really my wheelhouse, is to be a troublemaker and to be what we call a truth teller in the party, and to bring up these issues. Is that a lot of Democrats are taking filthy, toxic money from law enforcement, from real estate, from fossil fuel, And, you know, that might not be your pet issue, any one of those. It might not be something that you're activating on. But if they are taking that money and they're wrong on those issues, they will be wrong on every other progressive issue you care about. So as activists and as folks that want to be involved in the Democratic Party, you know, we often talk about building the bench. And take a look at the Democrats that are running in your area. And if they are at, you know, looking at their entree into political work, whether it's school board or parks or council or whatever, take a look at what kind of money they're taking, and then be very honest and public about the fact that that money is toxic. You know, make sure you call them out on it, get a consensus in your community about the fact that we're not taking that money, and that we are going to have some really honest discussions face to face with those folks and encourage them to succeed, because we want them to succeed without that money. We know that folks who start with that money early continue with that money later, and they become obstacles in the Senate or in the Assembly and the California Senate. So, you know, please, you know, be focused on that issue. When we look at people in our communities, let's be honest and make sure we get that money out of politics. If we get that right now, we'll be so much further down the road when we try to get all these bills passed, and getting these types of local officials to put pressure on assembly members and senators to do the right thing.
Hey, thanks, Amar. Well, on that note, and I'd like to throw out a question that anybody on the panel to jump into if you'd like. There's a perception that is pretty well grounded in reality that as a state government dominated by the Democratic Party, both the state of California and the California Democratic Party are pretty much good at talking the progressive talk, not all that good at walking the progressive walk in terms of fighting for the programs that we want to implement and sustain and strengthen. And so when we look at the amount of money washing through the state legislature, and we look at the top leadership of the California Democratic Party, including the chair of the party, how should progressives perceive that? There's a lot of justified skepticism that it's sort of a, to some degree, a fraud running, that the rhetoric is progressive. We're not getting the delivery. We're not getting the California Democratic Party actually delivering. And the rhetoric is good, the performance not very good. Is silence consent here?
Oh, I mean, I'm happy to take that question if you want. So I work on statewide legislation, and I can tell you that the fact that we had to even go to the ballot with Prop 21, where I served as the policy director, just to get rent control laws in our municipalities was outrageous, right? So why can't the legislature take that up? Why can't they repeal Costa-Hawkins? Same thing, I think, with the rental assistance. I would have liked to have seen $5 billion in rental assistance. We know that's what we need. We're going to have to come back for that extra $2.4 billion now. But why can't the legislature do that if we're Democrats and these are our values and things that we support? Same thing with the Ellis Act. We're losing housing at pretty alarming rates. It's just getting sort of taken, out of the realm here and sold, and we can't get the legislature to act on that. And so all the way down the line, like if you look at the housing production bills this year that have been introduced, there's no provision at all for extremely low income or very low income housing. And we've seen in the past that for these bills, they've been an option for developers. We don't have the luxury of having an option for developers to build for our extremely low and low income communities, because we spend $35,000 to $45,000 a year per person that's chronically homeless. So taxpayer dollars are being spent when we could be, housing people and spending much less. So that's an excellent question. And so, we lobby fairly regularly at the state level. And, it's a struggle just getting with table scraps for very low income and extremely low income housing. And like I said, like this is a crisis. So, leadership at the top needs to understand that there is a growing movement here on housing justice issues, on tenant rights issues, and it's unacceptable in the homeless capital of the United States, which is the city of Los Angeles, and the state of California, which has over 151,000 people who are homeless, to not provide housing at low income levels where they are needed. And I do take exception with the YIMBY argument that we need housing for everybody. Okay, that's fine. We need housing first for people who are homeless and people who are extremely low income. And our RENA numbers show this, and every study that you will look at shows that for people who are very low income, extremely low income, we need that housing now. So that's a really good question, and we need to start putting people, take them to the mat. And, I, as Amar said, I take elected officials out to Skid Row, and they come and they help hand out blankets. And I do want to say hi to Melvin, who's one of my friends who lives on Skid Row in a tent. I know that he's watching right now. So a big shout out to him. I did tell him I'd give a shout out to him. But yeah, I mean, this is absolutely outrageous. And as part of the endorsement process for the Democratic Party, we need to be asking these hard questions. We need to be asking, how they plan to build it for people who are 30% of the area median income and below. Why is that not happening? Part of our democratic principles, part of our obligation as Democrats, make sure we are taking care of the people who have the least in this state.
Yeah, and if I might add, regarding the hypocrisy of the party, because that's the question Norman asked, and I'll address it directly, is that, I think we're getting more and more sophisticated, progressives and voters and our nonprofits, about recognizing toxic money that goes through the legislature directly to assembly members, directly to senators. And I think they are less likely to take that money. But what's also true is that the California Democratic Party is a vehicle through which massive amounts of toxic money flow, and we launder it, we clean it, and then we deliver it to elected officials. And there's some that don't want any part of that, and I'm really happy to have Ash Kalra here today, who's always been somebody that rejects that type of toxic money. But let's be clear, the chair of the California Democratic Party signed a fossil fuel pledge not to take fossil fuel money in 2019. The party, through a committee, directed him not to take fossil fuel money. And then in the last election, he took $330,000 of fossil fuel money directly from those folks that are an obstacle to progress on green issues, and directly as an obstacle to those that are fighting for the future habitability of our planet. And right now we have an election underway in the California Democratic Party, and we're asking the tough questions to all of the candidates. Are you okay with, like Norman was saying, having progressive rhetoric, but then taking money from those folks that are clearly not on our side? And delegates and elected officials are going to have to get right on these issues. That you can't just have this false rhetoric and expect to continue to get support.
If I can, unless Assemblyman would like to go.
Please.
Just to add a few things, I think that, again, it is quite notable that a candidate like Senator Bernie Sanders can win the state of California, and we still have a state legislature that's not reflective of this agenda. And I think that there is, faults on all sides. I mean, the average Californian doesn't know who their assembly member or state senator is. Yet the state legislature is far more significant than US Congress. It passes 2 to 3 times as many bills as Washington, DC. And in fact, in most of the most of the big issues that we care about, criminal justice reform, affordable housing, public education, a lot of this happens at the state level, not at the federal level. And so we really need to start paying attention to who our representatives are and let them know that we are watching them, that we care about what they are voting on and what they're working on. And so they're not just hearing from the lobbyists, who really do run Sacramento. And Amar talked so eloquently about all of the money that's in our election system that causes our elected officials to not truly represent the voters. In every poll that I've seen around eviction protection, around wealth tax. Overwhelmingly, Californians support reducing inequity in the state. Overwhelmingly, voters support an eviction moratorium and renters not paying all of their rent back that they've lost during the that they were not able to pay back during the pandemic. And yet, our elected officials still don't represent this perspective. So one is that we need to start paying attention to the state legislature. Two, we need to start running. We need more Osh Kalras. We need more Alex Lees. We need more Lorena Gonzalez's. We can't just depend on these 3 or 4 members of the state legislature to center the progressive agenda that all of us need to see here in the state, from single payer reform to addressing homelessness, as Susie so eloquently talked about. And one thing I'm very interested in, and I'm working with a number of different groups on, from working family parties to California donors tables, to think about running a Justice Democrats before our state legislature. We need to start challenging incumbents. And over the next 6 years, in 2024 and 2026, 50% of the state legislator seats will be termed out. This is a huge opportunity for us. And for those who are watching, think about running. Think about folks that you know that are organizers in your community that should be representing us in Sacramento. Have them run in 2022. And let's start base building. In many ways, building upon the infrastructure that we built for the March primary last year. And I'll just kind of end with one more note. California is truly representative, I think, of so many of the big issues that we talk about. And one of them is inequity. We have the most billionaires in the country, and we have the highest poverty rate. And just to elucidate this even more, while millions of Californians filed for unemployment last year, starting in March when the pandemic started, California's 154 billionaires grew $250 billion from March of 2019 till today. That is an extraordinary concentration of wealth that was only further exacerbated by this pandemic. The inequity that already existed, this pandemic only made significantly more starker. So our work is so urgent. So we've got to take money out of politics. We got to have more electeds that are willing to take money from actual voters. We have to organize. We have to do that hard work because to me, that is the only way that we're going to win.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. And with what Susie was talking about in terms of the housing bills, she's 100% right that we should have gotten more. We should have done more for renters. But it's a numbers game. There was not enough votes to do something stronger. I mean, you saw it happen in DC, but the fact it's happening in California, where I want California to be the progressive standard bearer. I want us to be able to show the country that you can lead with progressive policies and progressive leadership and be successful. And the reality is that we have done, even as much as we struggle and say, wow, why can't we do more? I can do it. We still are, compared to other states, a very progressively run state in terms of workers' rights and what have you, even though we saw what happened with Prop 22, when close to $250 billion is dumped in. And now we just stripped away the rights of so many workers here in California. But that being said, it's a numbers game. And what that means is essentially is, look, it's not just good enough to have 3/4 of the legislative Democrats. You have to have folks that are willing to actually vote for progressive values. And everyone, when they're running, talks about how progressive they are. But there are some that are legitimately scared. Like they feel like, well, if I don't get my money from source A, I'm not going to be able to get money, and then I'm going to be defeated, or this group's going to get mad at me and dump all this money against me. And then there's those that just take advantage of the system. They run as Democrats. They know they can get money from all these different sources. They'll go up on progressive social issues, and yet at the end of the day, when it comes down to kind of bread and butter issues where we have an opportunity to bring really progressive legislation forward, it's like pulling teeth. To even get 41 out of our 80 something, just get half plus one, getting 50% plus one, you're not even on the 2/3 votes. It is so challenging. And so really it's about a couple of things. You have to organize within the district at the grassroots, the ground level, but you also have to get outside. And I know we all have our comfort zones and our bubbles, and especially I love being surrounded by progressives and talking progressive values. You've got to get out of your bubble of progressive support, of this progressive support network, talk to folks that may not be as familiar about the issues. That's much harder to do. That's the hard work. When you're knocking on doors and you're talking to folks, they could be Republican, they could be independent, they could be Democrat. We have to be comfortable getting, really stepping outside of our comfort zone, because these issues aren't partisan issues. These are not progressive versus conservative. These are issues about uplifting people that are struggling in our state, struggling in our country. If we can articulate that to folks as to why policy-wise, not just I'm a Democrat, I'm a progressive, not the labels, on the policy, that's how, in my estimation, Senator Sanders did so. Oh my God, I'm wishful thinking.
I love it. He's still my president.
That's right. I mean, part of the reason it was that the campaign was successful was you had folks like Jane and this incredible team that went into every community in the state. You had resources because he was able to fundraise on a national level, small donations, but it was the policies. People wonder, like, oh, like it's all these pundits on CNN. Wow, Latinos are really voting for Bernie Sanders. I wonder why. It's the policies. They were looking at the policies that lifted them up out of poverty, that brought them healthcare, brought them education, brought them minimum wage increases. I mean, if people look at the policies, when we talk policy, you don't have to mention any labels. You don't have to say I'm for Bernie or I'm a progressive, but that's the hard work. And that's the only way you beat the amount of money that comes in against so many of us oftentimes.
That's right.
I think too, Norman, I don't want to really let the governor off the hook. I think that there were a lot of issues with Gavin Newsom as well, because he opposed Prop 21, which was our rent control proposition on the last ballot, still continues to support fracking and, claimed to be for single payer healthcare, but, we're still waiting. So I think the recall gives us an opportunity for him to come back to all of these constituency groups and, at least make some kind of promises for us, based on Costa-Hawkins, asking for a waiver from the federal government for single payer healthcare, reaching out to environmentalists and have a plan to end fracking in the state of California. So, all the way to the very top, we've got to make change and really be pushing. And even at the level of the governor, I don't want to let him off the hook and just point the fingers at the legislature.
Mm-hmm. Jerry Brown used to boast that, like somebody in a canoe, he would paddle sometimes on the left and sometimes on the right. And it seems like our current governor is sort of imitating that as well, not paying attention to where the vehicle is headed, where the vessel is headed, like over the waterfall or something. Every 2 years, we all have an opportunity to improve who is in the legislature. And as Jane pointed out, we have an extraordinary special opportunity because of how the term limits that were extended will end in the next few years. So that is just an extra possibility for progressives, not only to primary people who are not serving our interests or others, but actually having open seats. And that makes me want to ask a question about perceptions from people who are progressive activists and who are really instrumental in propelling social movements, that the Democratic Party is so screwed up that why should they really put energy into trying to elect Democrats into the legislature?
Well, one thing I'll just say is that while many of our progressive candidates run as Democrats, for me, it's just more important that we recruit and support these candidates to run. And I'll just say, a few things. I was tracking about, 50 local races for the November 2020 race for largely city council and school board. And out of those 50 races, and these are candidates, it's one thing to run, of course, on a progressive platform. It's another thing to govern. But just talking about platform, ran on a Green New Deal, affordable housing for all, Medicare for all platform. And out of those 50 races that I tracked, 40 of them won. And a lot of them were outspent. But in smaller races, we can out-organize, we can out-door knock the money that's in the race. And what was incredibly promising to me was out of the 40 candidates that won, 2/3 were women of color. And in a state in California where 75% of all voters under 25 are people of color or from immigrant backgrounds, that is a huge deal. We must build a bench, a progressive bench that looks like California. So whether it's electing the first Hmong American and Cambodian American women to Sacramento City Council, Mai Vong, Suli Saro on Long Beach City Council, two super young LGBT Latinx members to the Delano City Council, Brian Osario, Salvador Solorio Ruiz, electing folks like Osh and Alex to the state legislature, Carol Fife, African-American mother, Oakland City Council. This is really our future. And I think we have to really be prepared to run multi-year campaigns. And so I'm encouraging folks to start running in 2022, to run against incumbents. And even if you don't win that first race, hopefully you'll be the front runner for that open seat in 2024 and 2026, because we know that building a ground game takes time and building a base of small donors takes time. But maybe we will win a few seats. And honestly, that will give many of Assemblymember Kalra's colleagues some courage to vote the right way, to vote the way we want to see our agenda move forward. So I think that is the message of hope that I would give, is that we do have these candidates and we must continue to build the bench, and the bench has to look like California. And two, I would just say that we really need to support these candidates. It's not easy to run for office. It's not easy to fundraise. It's not easy to go out there and go door knocking. And so we really need to be out there. And like I said, we can't disregard places like Inland Empire and Central Valley and Northern California that we typically have. These are places that we can win. And actually, we don't need as much money to win in these areas. And so we need these votes. And so that is what I would continue to push for.
And I would just add to that, I agree 100% on that. And to Norman's point, as far as is the Democratic Party, the vehicle for it, I believe so, because look, we currently have a two-party system that we have the opportunity to heavily influence one and the dominant party in this state, and we already have. We've seen, we've seen progressive legislators, maybe not as many to our liking in terms of being able to actually push as much of the agenda as we like, but to Jane's point, over the next 2 to 4 to 6 years, we have a huge opportunity. This is our opportunity to build that bench. And, also to what Jane said, I know that it's exciting when folks out of state and these really dynamic candidates are running for Congress and this, that, and the other, but look local, look to your city council, your school boards, look to your local legislative races and help them out, because, they're the ones that are going to struggle to fundraise if they're not taking corporate money. And their opponents are. They're really going to struggle, and then their results aren't going to reflect necessarily the synergy with the views of the community, because they just didn't have a fighting chance. And again, as a progressive candidate, you don't necessarily have to have as much money. You have to have much better organization, but you need some money. You've got to get your message out there to the community. You've got to be able to have a good group of staff and volunteers. And so look local, think about local. As you're running, think about the role that you play. Not everyone has to be the candidate. Not everyone has to be the campaign manager. The reality is campaigns need dozens, if not hundreds of people to be part of them, and find the role that you play. Maybe you have a full-time job and can give 10 hours a week. Figure out what campaign are you going to donate that time to, because that time is as valuable as money. And say, okay, for this election cycle, there's a really great progressive running for the school district or the city council in my neighborhood. I'm going to dedicate my 10 hours to that, and not to this national congressional campaign from some other state, as much as I love that candidate. And I think that's how we can start to really build that bench and get candidates that are prepared to win for legislative races. Legislative races are not easy. I had $6 million spent against me. No, these are not easy races. And so to be prepared for those races, you've got to have some foundation. And I think running for these other seats, city council and what have you, will really prepare progressive candidates for the next level too.
You know what, I might add that, to Norman's question about why the Democratic Party, and I've been tough on the party here in our chat and other places, but let's be frank, the Democratic Party brand is still a good one. When folks are going to vote, they still look to see who the Democratic Party is endorsing or who is a Democrat. When you have one party that is the home of radical bigots and work to elect a bigot, and the other that doesn't, let's just value that brand a little bit and be honest about the fact that I'm a Democrat, and I'm proud to say that I'm a Democrat, even though I am working on huge reforms within the party. So if there's a choice out there right now with the system that is out there, as Assemblymember Kalra says, it's a good idea to be a Democrat while you are saying the right things and working on these very difficult conversations on the issues that people support. And let's just be clear about how we're going to do that.
Well, we've got about 5 minutes left allotted to us, so I think this is a good time to ask Ash, Jane, Susie, Amar to share a minute or two of closing thoughts for now. Who would like to start?
I'll go ahead and just say I want to thank the Progressive Alliance for your work and for organizing. And at the end of the day, anything can be done. It's just a matter of how much work it takes and how much time it takes. This is not an overnight process. We're part of a movement that's frankly hundreds of years old. It's a movement for workers. It's a movement for the working class. It's a movement for the masses that is always up against massive struggle when you're going up against these hugely wealthy of entrenched interests. And so this is not supposed to be easy. Don't give up. Don't feel like, okay, well, I ran for something or my candidate ran, they didn't make it, the system's rigged. Well, yeah, I mean, the system is rigged in many ways, and we're trying to unrig it. And unrigging a system that's based upon the current power structure takes a lot of work, but it's worth doing. And so I'm just encouraged based upon all the folks that spoke, all the folks that are part of today's conference, because if we don't do it, there's no one else coming. It's us. We are the cavalry. We are the ones that we need, and we need to support one another, encourage one another, and let's do everything we can to continue this journey that we're on. And at some point, we're going to pass that baton on to the next generation of fighters and champions. But for right now, it's our moment. So let's not take it for granted that we're in a position to do something about it.
Well, I guess I'll go next. So I think there's 3 things that we absolutely need at the federal level: the universal housing vouchers, which could come as early as this year, maybe next year. That's actually something that's moving and something that the Biden campaign ran on. And so we're hoping that will be a reality for folks, which will really, 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 really help. The universal basic income and single payer healthcare. So 3 things that will help lift people out of poverty. We need to continue the cash assistance. And, I just love that, like with AOC and with Bernie and with a lot of folks at the federal level, they're really pushing for that. It is really making a difference for people. Not enough of a difference, but it really does make a difference between whether or not people eat or not, or whether or not they get to stay in their housing. I think statewide, we need to be pushing for the $2.4 billion in rental assistance. We needed $5 billion. We got $2.6 billion. We've got another $2.4 billion to go. And we will see that in a couple of weeks, that it's really, really needed. We need to really be pushing for homeless housing and for housing for very low income and extremely low income folks. That will really, really help. I think, yes, let's push for progressives to get elected. Too often, though, progressives get elected and they get kind of gobbled up into the system. So we end up having to hold them accountable as well. So this is, again, the importance of the movement building. Make sure there's a movement behind the progressive candidates that we get elected, so that they have the power that they need, or they know that we can go into various communities to try to convince people, so that they're not kind of always isolated and on their own. And I just want to thank everyone on the panel. This is great. I want to thank everyone who's tuning in today for the California Progressive Alliance. I think this is wonderful for everybody to get together like this in a day to hear all of the interesting campaigns that are going on and the legislation that's going through, and just use the Democratic Party to the extent that you can as a tool to help people. And I think, ultimately we're going to win. Thanks.
In closing, I would just say that and to remind and appreciate that there are so many folks that are suffering right now. And during COVID, especially, folks are suffering alone. And I just appreciate the heck out of the California Progressive Alliance for providing a space like this where, hardcore organizers who we haven't been able to get together, but today we can, and we can listen to each other and enjoy the time spent together. Moments like this, we used to take for granted, and hopefully we'll all be together soon. But until then, solidarity, keep on doing the work. We'll get this done. Thank you.
Well, first of all, it's really been a pleasure to be on this panel of folks that are doing incredible work here in the state of California. I would just kind of end on this note of hopefulness that I mentioned earlier. We are building a progressive bench here in California, and it is very diverse. And we need to continue to go out there and do the hard work of the door knocking, the door to door. The one thing I really saw during the Bernie 2020 campaign, and I think I saw this in the states that we won and the states that we lost, then in every state where we invested in grassroots organizing and door-to-door door knocking, we won. And I saw that when I went door knocking. I mean, no staff was considered too good to go door knocking. I went door knocking every single weekend. And what I saw was that when you explained what Medicare for All was, people were like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. And it didn't matter how they identified politically. Everyone thought that everyone should have access to healthcare, that it shouldn't be based on your employment, actually. And the news media isn't going to do that work for us. And in the states that we lost, we really didn't have the investment in the ground game. It's hard to have a ground game in 50 states. But we can do a ground game here in California together. And it should reflect the diversity of California. And ultimately, I do think we represent the majority. I do think that our agenda, our movement represents the majority, but we can't do it without the people. We can't do it without the movement. And that's where the door-to-door comes in. And I think often we get caught up in the conversation of being right, and not to say that we're not, but we can't do it on our own. We need to do the ground base building in order to win. And I hope, for folks out there, you're thinking about running, you're thinking about who could run if it's not you. Email me. I put my contact on the chat. I don't know if that is available to everyone that's watching, but my email is jane@janekim.org. I'd love to hear from you and what you're doing in your local community. Support AB 1400, which Assemblymember Kalra has introduced. It has a long and arduous road ahead of it. And so we really need to come out big and let our colleagues, his colleagues, know how important this to us. Finally, just a shout out to what Amar said about money in politics. HR 1 just passed the House of Representatives and Congress. It's now moving to the Senate. Yes, it's going to be a hard win for us, but we should absolutely try. Campaign finance reform, voting reform. We can't win without it. Right now, the stakes are set against us, and we need to change that. And I think there would be nothing more, game-changing in politics if we were able to take money out, if we were able to publicly finance every single race in this country. Imagine what an incredible investment of taxpayer dollars that would be if all of our electeds and all of our candidates depended on us to win and not big corporations. And so something to kind of think about as we go for these big, big ideas. But this work is going to take a very long time, but we are making movement. And so we need a lot of patience, a lot of resilience, and we got to stick it out together.
Really wonderful to hear all four speakers. Many thanks to Jane Kim, Amar Shergill, Susie Shannon, Kalra, and to California Progressive Alliance. We we need each other, and we're going to move forward. Thanks to everybody.
All right. Thank you all so much. This clearly is something we need a longer amount of time for. And there was many questions we didn't get to, but big appreciation to all the panelists and to Norman for moderating that great discussion. Hope we can continue this conversation. And thank you for all that you all are doing in our community, in our state, and in the movement overall. So thank you again. And to our audience, we are going to take a short intermission, and then we will have our final panel. And after our final panel, we are going to be presenting our first ever Gail McLaughlin Progressive Champion of the Year Award. So please stick around. Thank you.